your personal narrative and about portfolio content in general. Today, we're specifically diving into case studies to be able to talk more about that really meatier part of your portfolio. So let's jump into this presentation. So to start, what is a case study? So we're talking about something that's a detailed report, explains how you worked on a project, and it helps employers to be able to know what you've been able to do in the past, what you've been able to accomplish, your mindset, and the collaborative skills that you bring to the table. And it becomes a way that they can gauge you as a potential hire as quickly as they can, so that they know whether it's someone they should pursue or not. So each time those hiring managers are opening up one of those portfolios, they have those 30 tabs open, they get that first brief synopsis, and if it passes that first blush test of design and credibility, then they'll dive into a case study. And from that case study, then that's where they really start digging in. So why are they so important in being able to make that decision? It's really because they become that very second step after that initial first blush response to your portfolio site. They become that chance that you have to be able to demonstrate your value, how you can be a valuable addition to any team to help employees understand the bigger picture of what you've been capable of in the past, so that they can gauge whether that's the type of work that they need for you in their company. So demonstrating your value. What do you think a case study can do to demonstrate your value based on what you've seen looking at other portfolios and what I've talked about so far?
I think it shows the process, like your thinking process. How do you approach problem solving? If it's tidy or if it's all over the place. If you kind of read the case study and you're like, where did you start? Then you don't think this person is going to be good enough.
Okay, that's excellent. Yeah, you are able to demonstrate the process that you're following, that your ability to think critically about using the various steps and processes and tools in your UX tool belt. It's great. What do you think that we mean by the idea of providing context? Anyone have any thoughts?
More of an explanation as to your thought process throughout the design and understanding why it is that they're looking at the final product. Why and how did you get there?
Great, perfect. Yeah. You're providing sometimes people think of a portfolio as just that final product, but that why and how you got there is an important part of that, and what role you played in that. So great. You don't want to just hand over your final designs and then they think, oh, okay, this looks great, but what did you do? What's your part in this? Because most hiring managers know that most products that actually come to fruition and most projects you go through have to rely on multiple players in the part. And so understanding what your role was and how long it took and things like that gives them a sense of how quickly you work, what your role in the process is, what you're able to do in that process. So that comes back to this idea of the next bullet there, highlighting collaboration, because you can use this case study to describe your interactions with other people on the team and stepping through this whole thought process and how you might have leveraged a team to do brainstorming or to bring in everybody for a user research session or whatever it is that you do. All of that's going to paint a picture of what you can do collaboratively, because all product teams have to, have to have collaboration or things grind to a halt very quickly. And the last bullet is pretty straightforward. You're able to paint a picture of your later leadership roles. And when I say leadership, what I think is most important, not that you're the manager on a team or anything, but that you take an ownership over a design process to be able to stand for the design and stand up for design decisions that are based on sound research, to be able to take leadership from that standpoint when you're on a team, not to butt heads with people, but to be able to advocate and stand up for this design process and make sure that the work that you're doing continues to move forward throughout the working with developers. So you can talk about that process and what you did to help get over hurdles and things like that. That all shows an employer that you have the energy and the dynamism or whatever it is that it takes to push through hard stops in a project and just make it to the end. So it is a pretty good truism to think that you're not going to be able to get a design job without solid case studies. No matter how good your portfolio design is, and no matter how prominent you feel like you are in whatever group is, or whether you have a lot of reviews, people need to see some substance, and this substance is the case study, and it's really that playground where the hiring managers are going to be comparing potential candidates against each other. And if your case study is solid, that moves you up above the rest. So what should a case study include? What I want to do right now is to take some time and have each of you actually read a case study. Just find one to read on bestfolios.com. We'll talk more about that after you've read through one. So let's go ahead and have you go to this link again. Post it in Slack for ease of use. What I want you to do is just find one in the next 2 or 3 minutes. Don't necessarily stop on that first page, but jump back in here somewhere. Just open up a portfolio, a case study, go to the actual portfolio website, and click on one of the case studies and just read through. And it might take 5 or so minutes. If it takes longer than that, we probably don't want to read much more, but find one. I'll set the timer for 7 minutes so we get you a chance to find a portfolio and then start reading, and then we'll come back. But while you're reading, I want you to look for the layout, the types of content, what is going into it, what makes it effective for you to read, or if issues that you find in that portfolio. So think very critically in terms of
Christian,
what are the strengths and weaknesses. Does that make sense? Yes.
sorry, the last point was cut. I couldn't hear anything. I don't know if
Okay.
it was.
Are you hearing me okay now?
Yes, but I didn't get the last point. So you had layout, what makes it effective, and then there was one more thing that I couldn't hear.
Let's see, layout, what makes it effective, and then if it's not effective for some reason, what are the things that make it either difficult to read or difficult to follow? So you're looking for both those strengths and weaknesses, and each case study is going to be different because you're just randomly selecting one, but we want to be able to have a discussion about the strengths and weaknesses of each of these. So come back to the group prepared to discuss the case study you're reading and talk about some of those strengths and weaknesses. Does everybody feel okay about that? Understanding what we're doing at this point? Go ahead and put on a 7-minute timer. Okay, just about 4 minutes left. Just about 1.5 minutes left. Okay, just a few more seconds. Okay. Let me stop sharing for a second, and I want to hear from everybody just what your thoughts are. So let's start, and I'm going to just go from the bottom of my list and up top on Zoom. So Christina, you're first on my queue. What did you see as strengths, weaknesses in the case study you reviewed?
Okay. So this is the one that I found. It's basically what they did was they were trying to improve communication in Star Trek VR experience. I picked this one kind of because I'm kind of like interested in stuff like, you know, video games and VR and whatnot. It's something that's become really big. Going through this case study, they listed the problem. They were pretty clear about it, you know, what it was. That's one thing that I liked. And they talked about the solution. You know, they had some good visuals in it. They went over the process, you know, the team, what went into the research, you know, to see, you know, they went over some of the gestures that they were working through, which I thought was really cool. You know, how they designed it and tested it, the character design, the environment. They listed the different user testing, you know, some of the questions that people asked or some of the comments that were made, the input, which I thought was really neat. The second test, more character design, more sort of fleshed out environmental designs. They were basically really thorough about what their process was, even with some little screen grabs, you know, from the interactions and things like that. A few of the things that I didn't like, which there's quite a few, is that I don't know if you notice whenever you scroll down and you get to a section where there's the logos that popped up, these were all over, like every time you scroll down, these were all over. It just seemed like it was a little bit much because it does it every single time you scroll down. Something else that they really could have fixed was this timeline. It looks like they, instead of just maybe, you know, putting the text like it seems, how do I put this?
You know the Gestalt principle where they have that invisible line? or
Yeah.
the continuing line that's broken.
Yeah, thank you. That's what's bothering. That is actually exactly what's bothering me, because this should just be like a continuing line, and it looks like what they did was they just took some text and they gave it a white background and they put it over top of it. And especially since this is supposed to be a timeline, it's supposed to take you all the way through, and this does just seem like it's just a bunch of, pauses. The subtitles that they have aren't really, they don't really jump out. But this seems like, important text that they should probably have bolded. There are a lot of symbol and there are a lot of symbols and subtitles, which is okay. We're talking about, the gestures. I don't think I would have used it here for the design and test. I think I would have broken it down. Like if these were things that were important to have separate, I wouldn't have used this. I would have just gone straight to explaining it, because it seems like a lot. It seems like they were trying to fill the page, even though they already did have a lot of content to show.
Awesome. That's some great feedback.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I'm taking some notes as we go through, and then we're going to come back and sort of consolidate with everybody and talk about those. So let's go ahead and move to the next person in the view. And I believe it is Brandon.
You guys see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
So I really liked this person's case study. Just to start off, the thing that I didn't like is that it is extremely long. I think if I was to read every single word on it, it would take like 10 minutes at least. So I don't know. I did have that question though. I don't know the proper length for a case study, or like how much is too much. But this is like the most extensive one that I've seen so far. But they really outlined their role very well. All the problems that they had, they were very clear. And then later in the case study, they even revisit how they had to switch, like a new problem occurred, and then they had to adjust to that and just create new things because of that. So it's really clear on what struggles they went through the project and what went well in the project. Also, let me find it real quick. Here, their process was very clear. I like how they laid it out. So there's each stage in the process, and then each little detail within that stage in the process. So overall, this person's case study was very clear, and I got a really good idea for what they did in this project. It gave me some good ideas for how I would want to lay out my own.
That project is so long.
What's that?
Do you notice that project go up?
I can't hear you.
That was a
Go up
typo
a
in the
little
word
bit.
project.
Yeah.
Oh,
If you scroll
See
up
that?
just the other direction there, right at the bottom of that image, says project.
yeah. Yeah. But yeah, that's about it for me. But yeah, how long is too long for a case study?
That's a really good question, and I don't know that there's one size fits all, but I think we can all generally say if you think it's too long, it probably is, and you can find out what can I take out. There's always going to be a balance of trying to get enough information to be clear, but at the same time, if the hiring manager's got 30 tabs open and they're jumping into a case study, you want scannability first and foremost, and then length doesn't matter as much, because if they can find what part of the case study that they're looking for, that's going to make all the difference in the world. And so this again will be something that you could user test with friends, colleagues, peers, to say, when you're reading this, how is it? And there might be days when I think I'm really interested in this and I dive in and read the whole thing, and other days when I don't have quite as much time, so I just have to scan through. So there's a lot of nuanced considerations, but be as brief as you can while still getting the meat of the content is my general rule of thumb. Cool, thanks, Brandon. Great share. Nora, you're next on my list.
Okay. Here you go. So I found this person. I was just searching for case studies, and I got really confused because she's okay. I'll scroll through. Actually, she has an interesting background, but this is her case study. I like how she identified the client, the role, her teammates as well, like just sharing their names. I thought that was like quite thoughtful. I like her description, but that's about it. She just goes on to show her work with nothing else. So initially I thought maybe I looked at the wrong person. Is she an illustrator? But then when you go at her to her about page, she does like a whole bunch of things. So she's an illustrator, graphic designer, web design, UI. So she does it all. And if you look at her projects, like she tells you exactly what she did. So this was branding. I didn't look at it. I went to Rome because she said she designed actually Rome said web design on it earlier, not just art direction. But yeah, it doesn't tell me what she did, how she got there. It just shows me like pretty pictures, and that's about it. Yeah, I mean, if she's going to say she's a UX UI designer and web designer, then I do expect a little bit more, not just like illustrations and pretty pictures. Like, I mean, this is about as far as she got. I don't actually, just a few screenshots. So yeah, that's the thing I didn't like about her portfolio. I mean, she does a great job, but this is it. This is all you get from her. So yeah, I wouldn't hire her as a UX designer if I was a hiring manager, because I just don't know how she thinks.
Right.
She's got some cool skills, but that's it.
Cool. Great observations and good share. Appreciate that. And Kelsey, I think you're next in line.
Let's see. So, yeah, I believe this is Joy Chen. I really actually like her portfolio a lot. She starts by giving a really brief introduction of what this app is that she's created. She then goes in to describe like kind of what they were trying to solve by creating this, which I thought was really cool and interesting. And there's like a brief summary here of the team and when they worked on it, and what she did specifically and what kind of project was, which I think is really helpful for giving us like sort of a grounding and understanding of what we're looking at here. The design outcome, yeah, I guess she's talking a little bit more about like what she's done to solve that challenge that she described to us earlier. And I get the impression that these are kind of like her initial like design ideas, but I think it's also a demonstration of like what they ended up coming up with. So it's kind of formatted like an essay where you like get the problem, you get her solution, and then she goes into like talking about how she got to this point. So next is like design process. And I like how she has these little tags here. Not quite, for lack of a better word, or maybe breadcrumbs, I think is the correct term, that just sort of like give you this little reference of where you are in the process, in her process, and like what exactly this is. I do feel like it gets a little bit long at times. I don't think it's the biggest offender for that for me, I think, is where she gets into like the flow values, fine, and the information architecture. But when she gets into wireframes, she has like a lot of wireframes. And it kind of feels to me that she could have picked one that she really liked and showed us that, and then maybe provided a link that would take us to like see more of her wireframes, if that's something that she wanted to like include, because I think all of this, and especially with some of this text being as small as it is, it's like hard to read, and I think this space could have been utilized more better by picking one really like great example of a wireframe so we can see that, but this is just like a little overwhelming with the amount that's here. Yeah, and then she gives us a little look at her design elements, which is nice, and kind of back again to like the final product. And then, yeah, I guess she gets more into like what exactly they were solving, and yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so I think overall the organization of what she's done is good. Sometimes it feels a little bit repetitive, and sometimes there's just a little too much content, and it's a little overwhelming, and I think it could be edited down a little bit.
Great. Thank you. Also, some great observations there. It looks like JP is next in my queue.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. So I chose this one. Interesting because, okay, first, upon looking at it, it's just pretty much, it's a picture because when if I can, anyways, it's about Venmo. It's saying rediscovering the users, saying how, how messaging should be. So it's like Venmo and saying the problem statement, saying this problem is apparent because this needs to change. And then research prompts here, qualitative and quantitative. So what qualifies this to be, something that is a problem? So here's the research, the proposition saying this is what's happening. This is what I find interesting because when you look at the process, you can see there's fun, social control, easy, convenience, and you can see the engagement levels of each of these, and you can see that low engagement is fun and social, but which is interesting because there's two, fun and social on the bottom and fun and social on the top, which I kind of don't understand because there's high engagement in here and low engagement in here. We can see the affinity diagramming, which is pretty much a lot of post-its, and you can see it's just all of research they've done, and how to understand the current users and non-current users and their financial behaviors. Now we can look at each engagement and what is what is bad and what is good. And you can see here the check marks will significate like what's good and what's bad. Control, same thing again. Ease and convenience, safety, and then he has more research prompts. And based demographics, establishment, which is interesting because you have all these 5 things, and then fintech, which is really cool. There's like naming the 36 features of fintech in from the design sprint. Data management. Okay, so I found this really interesting because it's stating the problem, and not only the problem, the research prompts and how you can solve them. And what I found really, really interesting is that when I go to the website, it's saying the project is under NDA, which will probably mean that Venmo's actually contacted this person saying this is a really good idea. So I'm not too sure about that. And the only way I could look at it is if I was to click the picture. So yes, that was mine.
Cool. Thank you. Serena, do you want to go next?
Sure. All right. Releasing some tension. Okay, so let's actually go to this guy. We are in his case study right now for LeetCode, and I particularly am very much gravitating towards this design. His copy is extremely concise as to what the project was about. It gives you a little bit of context here, gives you some context as to what his involvement was and his tools, and gives you a little bit of reason as to what the problem was and why they want to redesign specifically their layout, and they're trying to get engagement of their users. And as you can see, everything is super clean. It's very scannable, and those are the portfolios I gravitate towards the most. Everything is very scannable. He shows you the variations of his wireframes, variations in his typography or decorations, and how his process was throughout discovering mobile or tablet and web. He also explained that he wanted to do some A/B testing and why he did that. And then he concludes with analytics. So he concludes with there was a 4% increase. He had 2 times the impact by making very small changes. And this is how the product is now doing so much better. Users are taking much more advantage of the certain tools and features within this product. And I just thought that the most important parts of this project were highlighted and very well done. So as you can see, it's like maximum 2 paragraphs per point that he's trying to make. And I found another one, which was also very concise. They give you an overview as to what this product is, what they need to fix, how they're going to apply it to multiple platforms. This didn't load for some reason. He also has some interesting quotes from the CDOs and how it starts to develop into versions and his choices and his thought process behind everything. Again, very straightforward, simple, clean. Yep, so that is what I found.
Excellent. And Ivan, I think you were last.
And let me get it. There we go. So we're here on like this on Yang Neon portfolio. I chose one of her projects, Vault. This would help people with student loans not have debt, and she organized everything super well. You know, you get a nice, quick about the app, then with more context, more explain the role. So you put any team or role, so I don't know why. But she did explain the process pretty well. She put some quotes from some of the interviews that she got. She actually put a journey map right here. So you can understand a little bit her thought process was she didn't put too much like some of the examples we had with you guys. So I found that everything was, you know, what we needed to know in order to understand this app and the process that she went through with her team. I really liked it. Everything was separated in nice chunks where you can take each one by one. She gave a lot of examples. You can see the controls, you can see the journey map, you can see the solution to the problems that was posed and everything like that. It was really solid design. She also uses a lot of the coding for like important parts that she wants you to really know. And it's a really solid one. The only thing I really don't like is this. It kind of gets in the middle of things. So just take that off. Maybe put it somewhere else. That'd be amazing. But other than that, I really like this one.
Sorry, I was
Can hear
muted. Yeah. So we all had a chance to look through some portfolios and see each other's these case studies and talk about them together. And I think some of the commonalities that I was seeing are we were seeing a brief statement up front of what the problem was, something that gives us a synopsis of diving into this project to understand what it is that we're seeing. And then a good, I think there were several examples of people who were explaining the context really well, just maybe a call outside box of some kind that shows who the team was, what their role was on the project, maybe the timeline. And so that was something that seemed like it was really helpful. I think we heard a couple of times where there were pieces that maybe were getting a little long. I know Brandon asked that specific question, and we discussed that a little bit. But if you think about that, as you write your case study, I think, is someone going to perceive this as too much information? Can I cut out some of this and just get to the very bare bones? And I think it was Kelsey who referenced like the wireframes. The person had a ton of wireframes where that's not really being very useful because they couldn't read the text on those wireframes. Having one example of a wireframe, like she said, would be great. And then there's that principle of progressive disclosure. I don't know if we've brought that up in any of your classes so far, but users are often benefited by having this idea of progressive disclosure where there's some information provided and then a link to additional information or a drawer of some kind that exposes additional information if that's what they're looking for. So it's certainly a great idea to have, if you want to provide all that information, but keep the case study itself very succinct, to have a second page where they could go to download or see all of the additional information or read more details about something. That's a perfectly viable way to handle additional information, wanting to provide more. And it's certainly helpful, especially in an interview context. If they pull up your portfolio and say, "I'd like to know more about this," you could say, let's dive into another page. I've got more material that we can show you more in detail, these things that I've just alluded to in my case study. So that's something that's very good. Let's see, some of the other things that came up. I think we noticed a couple of different places where there were typos, and for some of us, that might be something we gloss over, but some of us caught it right away, which I think will happen a lot with hiring managers as well. Some might miss it, but others will catch it right away. And if you have a typo, the immediate question is this someone who cares about their work? And, we make mistakes. I have typos, but if you can have two people read through, you'll catch most typos in most cases. If you read through it again after waiting a few days, read through it, you catch typos much more easily. So being diligent about that just shows a little bit more to an employer. If they don't see any typos, that's avoiding marks against you, so to speak. Let's see. I think the scannability, I think Kelsey alluded to some of the, she called them breadcrumbs, but those titles that were on the side of the page, they were very distinct, and you could easily scroll to the page and see where each of those sections was. And Serena mentioned scannable prototypes are much more inviting to her reading. I think that's the case for just about anybody with time. If you can really focus on that text hierarchy and address those concerns of scannability, getting people to those sections. I think Ivan mentioned chunking this information into easily scannable groups really helps to make a case study feel less like a burden to plow through rather than than being burdensome. So great. I feel like the observations you were making were all spot on. And so I think that as you get into writing, one of the disconnects that people don't take the time to do is to think like their user, think like their reader when they're conveying information. I think, oh, people need to know how awesome this project was, or how thoroughly I did this. And if you can just swap your role for a minute and say, would I want to read this? That will be very handy role to take for yourself, and to be able to then make your writing more concise. I think it'll work for you that way. Okay, awesome. Let's actually take a break. So let's do a 5-minute break, and we'll come back and talk more about case studies. So I'll put up a timer. We'll be back in just a second. Okay, we're back. So we've covered most of this just in our discussion and our review of the portfolios that you already looked at. But I just wanted to reiterate these points very quickly. First, providing that strong introduction, what the problem is super valuable for that initial look by the program manager or the hiring manager, because they're wanting to be able to get through their material as quickly as possible to get that understanding of what the project is. So bringing it up to the front and making that making sense of it. One thing that we did hear from hiring managers is that oftentimes the strategy is that they want to see the final result. And so sometimes you can create that context, set that introduction, provide what the final result was, and then dive into the project. And that can be an effective way for them to see everything that they want to see up at the top. And then if that draws their interest, then they can continue reading and have the rest of the context that they need. And definitely there are hiring managers who talked about that they would come to the front page and then scroll to the bottom as the very beginning. So if you help them avoid that, that can become a great asset to your job or becoming one of their top picks. Okay, overview of the entire project, giving that sense of timelines. We talked a little bit about the context that you could provide there in a call out box for as just an example. You can talk about where you collaborated versus individual contributions, what your role was, and then any failures or difficulties along with your thought process. So I think Nora especially mentioned that seeing that thought process was very valuable, being to explain that. Seeing failures and difficulties and how you overcame them is a great signal for perseverance and recognizing where you've been weak and showing strength in overcoming those weaknesses. And that's the type of thing that employers often find valuable, is somebody who's humble enough to recognize where things went wrong and how they could overcome those things and make up for them in the future. The key deliverables is a good thing that I don't think we touched on in this terminology, but being able to show those parts of the process that are most relevant. If you're working for a client, there might be phases or stages where you are providing wireframes or a user flow or some other documentation. And it's good to be able to include examples of those things as some of the imagery that you provide. And that helps to be able to give them that context more readily. And then the end results, I mentioned that already. They want to see what that product was. Now, I will mention that a lot of times people in those case studies are looking for, that very high fidelity end product. And ideally for someone who's been in the field for a while, they're looking for metrics like one of those portfolios showed, was what are the analytics that show whether it was used more or whether it provided more revenue or value. That's the type of thing that's going to be, very compelling for a hiring manager. This person has shown that they can design something that made improvements. But that's not always possible, especially not as a student in the projects that you work on in labs. So being able to talk about the process and whatever your end result is, even if it might not have been like a super great end result, that you'll be able to talk about the things that you learned or the things that you did well in that process as a case study. And those become in addition to another case study that you end up developing where you do have those. So it's still material that can convey your thought process, your ability to be successful as a collaborator, and lessons learned so that you're an improved individual. So don't discount projects that might have felt like they bombed as material for providing insights to a potential hiring manager. You may recognize this slide. Case study doesn't necessarily need to be linear. And a lot of times our design process, even though we teach you these phases as discovery, definition, design, and iteration and ideation, all that, we teach that as a cycle, but things happen kind of in a mixed fashion. So you're not trying to appear to a hiring manager as somebody who has memorized all of those steps in the process and that you can do them all. What you are trying to convey is that you can think about the problems. You have tools in a tool belt that you can use to solve problems that are put before you in a designerly way, and then come to a good, successful conclusion. So you can show that exploration, show how you solve those problems in front of you, and that all the ambiguity that you have to deal with at the beginning, you've been able to order into some sort of clarity, and you can demonstrate that through a case study as well. So the things that the questions you're trying to answer are, what's the project's timeline? What did you work on individually? What did you work on as a team? Did you play any sort of leadership role? What challenges did you face and how did you overcome them? What was your thought process? How did you think through things? How did you use the tools that you've learned as a user experience designer student in the actual project that you're working on? And what did your team deliver at the end? And how successful was it? The more of these questions you can answer for your hiring manager, the better the case study will likely be, just because those are the types of questions that they're going to be asking themselves as they're trying to hire somebody. Any questions about anything that I've covered so far?
I have a quick question about was the project linear or iterative? Can you explain a little bit more about that? How can we convey that?
Sure. So there's oftentimes a project where it's called the waterfall process, where you're given all the specifications up front and you have to design everything and then deliver to the developers, and it needs to be ready for them to develop at that point. And that's called the waterfall process. But more and more companies are using an agile approach or lean methodologies, which they're not trying to get everything done all at once. And so you take little pieces and you design that minimum viable product and you hand it over to developers. They develop that while you're beginning to add features to the existing designs so that then they can implement those. And that's what we mean by iterative. And so that chance to test and validate is something that you would want to talk about in that iterative process, as opposed to one where you didn't really have a chance to do much iteration and you just had to get it done because the timeline was tight and you didn't have time for user feedback or things like that. So being able to talk about it that way is good. Does that answer the question? Does that help clarify?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, awesome. Great question. Now here's a question for you. Balancing text and visuals. As we were looking at each other's case studies that we were reviewing, I think that we saw a variety of usage of visuals versus text. And there's really no set answer for what's acceptable. We're striving for a balance, that you're really going for what's going to be most useful for conveying the information that I need to convey, for convincing somebody that I'm a hireable designer. So you will have to use some of your own design sensibilities to decide, is this an appropriate place for an image? Do I need something here? Am I getting too text heavy? So images are heavy, and I think we saw that with the wireframes in Kelsey's example, they become overwhelming in a lot of ways if we've got too many of them. And it can be even more to digest sometimes, something like wireframes especially, than text would be. So really with images, we're trying to relieve somebody from the mental cognitive load of having to read text, but at the same time you want to have enough text that we're providing the information that's relevant for them to see. So maybe a couple of paragraphs of text and then an image would be a good rule of thumb to go by. And you want those images more to represent a summary of the deliverables rather than actual raw inputs. So we wouldn't necessarily want all those wireframes in, but you might want an example of the wireframes just to give them a taste of how you approach wireframes. There was an image, I think it was in JP's, where they were using the sticky notes for an affinity diagramming. So they took a picture of that experience. It wasn't a super compelling image, but it showed that they had gone through the efforts. So you can use images like that of the process to just set the stage, give some illustrative nature to them. So again, no hard and fast rule, but your objective is to have those elements tying together to tell that narrative of the case study. Brings it all together. Any other questions about that? Okay, we've talked a lot about lots of these elements, and we reviewed them some together. We're looking for that cohesive narrative, perfect grammar, spelling, punctuation, no errors, no extra lorem ipsums stray in there. Strikes a balance between visuals and content. It's descriptive yet readable. So balancing that length versus just enough, and it's honest. That's a very, very important part of this. We've talked about it a little bit, but that idea that you're not overselling your skill set. You're not taking credit for somebody else's work on a project that you were on, but you are trying to put yourself in the best light possible. So I've got a few examples that I am going to just click through here. We can pull these up and just talk briefly about them. I think this is the first one. So this is Kevin Park, product designer. You come to this product design for this ring product. And the first thing you get is an image of software that's covering a few different types of devices. You scroll down, more imagery at an angle, another imagery at an angle, and maybe some interface level design. It's not too exciting as far as design goes, and that's all we've got. So thumbs up, thumbs down, good portfolio. Yeah. There's not enough context. There's not enough explanation of what the product is, what it's supposed to do, what was their role on the product. You can see right away that the hiring manager coming to this site is going to say, Kevin Park, I don't know what you're doing. I can't spend any more time here, sorry. And they go. So here's another example. I'm going to post this in the Slack channel just in case it's easier for you to view that there instead of just what I'm showing. They explain, this is a project I did last winter when I interviewed for a startup called Wish. It explains what Wish is. And then They talk about this downloading the app to explore it as a user. Their user research they have here, some imagery, more text, and imagery and text. And then they talk about ideation, some design decisions. And then a feedback section. What are your impressions of this as a portfolio piece?
So.
So.
It's better than the first one, but I think that working on a text hierarchy would have made it a little bit better. And yeah, I think it has a good balance of imagery versus copy.
Okay. Yeah, I would concur. It's not super scannable. I mean, there is some headings along the way, but there's other information that, as a hiring manager, I might want to know a little bit more easily. The role on the project. This is actually a project. They may have been a student or just an early career person, but this is a part of an interview process. It was a design challenge they were given as part of their interview process. So they went ahead and made a case study about how they approached this design problem. So that's a good note for if you're looking for case studies, then think about ways that you can just take something you might be doing anyway if you end up in the interview process and there's a project that they give you to help demonstrate your skills. Then you can work that into your advantage in the long run if you have some case study material from that emerges from that. So, okay, yeah, good balance of imagery. I think we're getting some images that help tell the story a little bit more than just the text. So, did somebody else have?
Typically, how long are the interview challenges? Like, how many days do they give you to complete one?
That is not a very uniform type of thing. If somebody gives you a challenge and it is part of their product and it's part of the interview process, I'd be very leery of participating and continue working with that company because many times, like especially a startup, they might have candidates do a project and then they take the ideas from those projects and then just use them, but they don't hire anybody. So that's a word of warning and caution. But if a company, what I would like to do, and I've had experience with, is they might do a whiteboard challenge. Like say, this is a problem that we've had. Will you walk us through what you would do to solve this challenge? And so you just get on the whiteboard and you talk through. Some might give like an overnight or a couple of days to do a project challenge, but there's really no universal way that people do those interviews. And more likely people might do it for a new designer versus a established designer. But anything that takes longer than like an overnight turnaround, I would be very concerned about that company in general, as opposed to someone who just, they do want you to demonstrate some skills. And I think the 24-hour time period should be sufficient for them to be able to see what you're able to do and not drain too much of your time for very little reward. I don't have a better answer than that, but hopefully that helps clarify. All right, let's look at another one as an example portfolio. This here as well. This is from Justine Wynn, and it's a case study that she published to Medium. So I worked with Rappler for 2 to 3 months to design a collaborative platform that combines top-down government action with bottom-up civic engagement. AGOS helps communities mitigate risks and deal with climate change and natural hazards. So we're giving a brief synopsis up front. She explains this is an in-depth case study describing my design process, and then gives a little overview of what she'll be doing. Some text hierarchy for introduction, and then talking about roles, people involved, onboarding. That's nothing to do with the actual product itself, but about the story. A little graphic about the process. Some call outs and labels, imagery. Some additional text. Some graphics. Sections, wireframing, mood board, medium high fidelity mockups. More imagery, and then text, imagery, reports, A/B testing, and it goes on. The last 2 sections are key takeaways and what I would have improved. Something she looking at a year after. What are your thoughts about this portfolio piece, this case study?
It's a lot of information.
Okay. A lot of information.
She does prepare you for that, though. She says that it is an in-depth case study. So I kind of expected that. I mean, I haven't read it, so I don't know if her content is useful, but I think it's the way it's laid out is very readable. It's and she sets you up for understanding that it might be overwhelming, in my opinion.
Okay. So being clear at the outset of what it is trying to convey, I think if you think about a hiring manager needing to make a decision about this designer, they may come to this website and then from there go to one of those case studies. This person has quite a bit more experience than a beginning designer. From here, likely a case study like that is going to be useful as an academic exercise for somebody going and really diving in and trying to think about the process and trying to understand a design process like this. So as a hiring manager, I might look at this and say, well, okay, this person is obviously putting in some time to provide value to the community and showcase some skills and also processes and how that's helped her as a designer. So this feels like more something that an experienced designer would be giving back to the community as opposed to just being for the hiring purposes. And you think as a designer, then each of those types might have a better role. If you're a new designer, you're just trying to share what your skills are with the hiring manager. You may not need to go in that far of depth, but if you're really building out your persona as or your character, your public I guess your personal brand as somebody who's really engaged with the UX community, trying to share what you've learned with others. That can be a selling point in a different kind of way, but still valuable in a portfolio. So those are just additional considerations to weigh as you build out your own case studies. All right, one more case study that we can look at together here. This one is Go Creative. Excuse me. So they have a case study with a title called Search Results Page. They have a background section. They have text hierarchy, or I think a little bit better scannability than just a black headline might be. But I'm confident that's associated with their brand color, so that makes sense. Orange is a very strong color, and people have oftentimes a love or hate relationship with that color, so you have to use it with confidence. Anyway, this one talks about iteration 1, iteration 2. So now we're diving into 2 different versions of a redesign. We have the before picture, which is very helpful for conveying information about the project we're about to work on. And then iteration 1, we get to research and discovery, talking about what user research they did, what some of the results of that was in terms of pictures. Then they talk about the design and exploration process, just a couple of paragraphs, and then some examples of their iterative process of actually coming up with a solution. Then they have a big clear picture of their final solution after iteration 1. Some reasoning behind that. Filter logic that might not appear in this actual image, so they can talk about that in more detail. More details about the mobile version. And then they have a results section, which is always valuable. I think we talked about that already a little bit, but they saw a 27% improvement in paid add to cart and 6% lift in checkout success. So they were seeing some improvements based on their design. Iteration 2, they give an overview of that. Again, solution sketches of trying to find their solution. And then some very detailed UI elements so that you can see what it is that they came up with, the final solution. Algorithm improvements, and then some of the results section again. What they would do next and what they would do differently. So another example of probably a really well put together case study, very clear, easy to scan. The text was not too much compared to the imagery, and vice versa. The images were helping to convey the right type of information that would help somebody wanting to hire this group to be able to successfully understand their qualities and their skills. Any questions or concerns or observations about that?
How do you some of the images that you have to put in a case study are all like sketched or like photos of sticky notes? How do you balance this with having a very polished image at the end, like of your prototype or your wife, not your wireframe, but more like your prototypes? Like if you have really nice illustrations and then you stick those dark photos in the middle, wouldn't it not look very cohesive? I don't know what the right thing to do here.
That can be a personal preference. I think in most cases that if you have a photo that's really unappealing and it doesn't really, or even if it's ugly. When I think about, I think it was the one on JP's that had all those sticky notes. It wasn't a very well composed picture. It was just a picture of the whiteboard. In those cases, I would almost say I'd rather leave it off, because for my personal portfolio, I want it to appear a little bit more aesthetically appealing. And so I would be very careful to not put on something that immediately detracts from the overall design. But I think that you can, as you're going through the process, take well composed pictures, even if it's a boring subject, so you have enough lighting and you have enough like a layout of the picture, so that it's not just someone or just a flat whiteboard, and that can still be effective, even if it's of a different style. If it's well cropped, for example, you can crop something to make it a little bit more compelling.
What about hand sketches? Do you think it's important to like sketch them like online, or use colors or something like that to make it look appealing?
If I'm using sketches, actually, let me pull up my portfolio. Let's see if I can.
That was the last question, by the way. So I'll just mute my.
So I have two portfolio sites. One I created sort of on a whim when I was testing out Wix, and I think this is the one. So here I just have a whiteboard just to show illustrating user flow context. It's not a super compelling image, but it's next to it. So I have a wireframe and then a high fidelity design that I worked on for a company. So those are not case studies, but sort of an example of how you might use imagery, cropping in on it. I just had that cow randomly, so it's a kind of unusual. Let me open my other one. I can't even remember what state this one's at. Okay, so this is where I was talking a little bit about cropping in. I have the sticky notes and all that on the user flow, and so I just cropped it in as a header image, and that gives you the essence of what it is that I'm working, and then I put on that toning to it. So it's still like a boring picture, but the crop helps make it less so, and still conveying the information while feeling a little bit more designed, and then crop there. So I don't know if that's answering the question that you're asking, but hopefully, I actually don't have an example of a case study on the web right now, because the last two jobs I got were actually referrals from someone in the company, which is a nice place to be later in your career than really starting early out.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. But maybe we could go to Nick's site. See if he's got a case listed. So go to portfolio. Maybe that's a work in progress. Well, I probably won't spend time looking for more. This is an interesting feature. I haven't seen that before. It's giving trying to provide context to anyone coming to see where he lied on this web of skills. It's kind of cool. All right, I won't try to dig for more. What other questions do you have, and did that sufficiently answer what you were asking about, Nora?
That's it. Thank you.
I was just asking if I had, okay.
Yes, you did. I think it pays to take really good pictures early on, as opposed to just like try to document things really quickly without thinking, and then comes the final process and you're like, this doesn't really fit in, or it might put people off from reading further because they're like, what is this? It looks pretty bad.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point for some of what we're going to be talking about next. Is when you actually get to the process of writing your case study, you're going to gather all those materials and review your work. And you're saying early in the process, you'd be thinking about portfolio and think about, if you're going to snap some pictures, how can you compose these to make these the most compelling images? Can you snap several different styles so that you can have additional material to work from as you're working? If you're sketching wireframes and things, one of the pictures I think I used in the past that I didn't have on those portfolio pieces was actually throwing down a few of my sketches down on a piece of paper or on the desk, so that papers are just sort of overlapping each other, so that I get this picture of a pile of paper with some character to it rather than just a picture of a sketch. So that conveys the meaning in a different way than just a picture of a sketch would. But gather all these materials, review your work, organize it into a timeline or into some other structure to the writing, because you don't necessarily have to be linear, but oftentimes that is a really good way to structure it. Just identify your contributions and your team's contributions, sort of get those pieces out on paper and in your document, and then write that outline similar to what we did before. Focus on the narrative. What questions did you have along the way? Make notes where visuals can go, and then expound on that outline and review it. Then that is basically, it's really the design process, the writing process. It's all the same. Go from broad into narrower and getting more and more detailed. So what questions do you have about this, if any? Okay, what I want to do is similar to what we did before with a reviewing of a case study. And I want to create a list of case studies that you can share together. We're just going to take another about 7 minutes to do this process on a new case study. Actually, given the time, we might want to just use the case study you did before, so we can get all that notes that we took documented into this, or you can do a new one. It doesn't matter to me, whichever way. But let me give you this share access. I know I haven't got this shared right. So you should be able to access that. So go ahead and we'll take 7 minutes and just enter in the portfolio, the case study link, and then talk about some of those notes that you shared with the class, or if you've got a new one, similar types of notes. And it's just good to come back and reference together and have access. So we'll set the timer again for 7 minutes.
Hey, Christian, it says it's only a view only.
Oh, I just changed it.
Try refreshing it,
Should be
JP.
able to access it.
Let me give it a try.
Let's see if
Yeah, it's still saying view only.
I should say anyone. Okay, sorry. Anyone with the link can edit. Okay, that's it. All right.
Okay, let me give that
Sorry.
a try. Perfect, thank you.
All right, thanks. Sorry about that again.
Yeah, it happens.
I'm gonna add a couple of minutes back onto this just because we didn't get started right away. Okay, about 3 minutes left. Okay, take about 30 seconds. Looks like we only have 5 entries so far, so hopefully the rest of you can get something in there. Feel free to keep using this as a reference and then adding additional ones as you look through and you make comparisons to what you're doing. Okay, let's talk about the assignment for tomorrow. Excuse me. For our assignment is to focus on creating a case study for the Build Week project where you worked with the developer students. And so basically over the course of the last few weeks at Lambda School, you did discovery, ideation, definition, all of that. So gather and structure your content, get all the materials that you can find, organize them into narrative structure. Remember your personal narrative. Ask yourself, how can this case study content present and reinforce that narrative? And you can consider supporting progress, links to the final deliverables, videos of team brainstorms, or audio snippets of user research, if you have the user's consent, anything that reinforces that work that you've done. Write your case study in a Google Doc, just write your first draft. And this is really what we're focusing on, the quantity over the quality, because the more you get, you can always take away from, but it takes longer to add things to. So getting in there, getting as much written as you can. Continue to think about and define how it will all fit together. And this is just a reference to what we talked about today, those questions that you can answer in the content. This is yours, your case study. You want it to be unique to you and answer the stakeholders or the hiring manager's questions. then as a part 3, I just want you, after you've gone through the process of writing that, just think about what it is that you wish you had that could help flesh out this case study, whether it's more notes or imagery, sketches, any of those things. Just write a little paragraph, sort of a self-analysis. Doesn't have to be long, but just capturing that thought process so that as you get into your next projects that you work on in labs and beyond, that you're thinking about those things as you go along. If you take some time to just jot notes about that, that'll help you in the future. For stretch goals, once you get through your first draft, keep iterating, make changes, have somebody read through it, check for grammar problems, and just keep working on that. And then your submission is normal. Any questions about that? Any questions or concerns about the case study process at all? Anything that I can just talk through with you for
This is our Build Week project that we're talking about.
Yes. I haven't even checked Slido this one. So let's look through these. Could you tell us what we can expect for the sprint this week? For the sprint challenge this week, you will be, I have to remind myself, hold on a sec. You shouldn't have to do any coding if that's your concern. Our objective is really to begin creating this portfolio, so your sprint challenge will be related to that, not coding. Let's see. What is Build Week going to look like for us? There will be a small coding challenge on the Build Week, but primarily it's also going to be aimed at developing out or designing out your portfolio. So basically getting to high fidelity, but not having to code that up. But there will be a code challenge for just assessing whether you're remembering just the stuff that we went over. It's not a huge deal in my view of things. So, and it hasn't been a huge deal for other previous cohorts as well. And can we get a copy of the slides today? Yes, I can get those. Juggle that to myself. And if I want to be UI UX engineer, how much code should I include in my case studies? You should have case studies that focus on whatever role you play. So if you are wanting to do that, I would definitely be working on UI development, and from that, building out case studies that are focused on that role that you're playing. So definitely you would want to have, you don't necessarily, I should be careful to say, I'm not exactly sure what the hiring managers will look for in terms of actually seeing the code, but oftentimes it's good if you have the authority to share your code, to just share a link to a GitHub or something so that they can do a bit of a code review, or at least showing your GitHub repository and that sort of thing. Hopefully that answers that question. If you want more details about that, hit me up on a DM and I can try to point you in the direction of someone who can answer those questions a little bit better than I can. Do you ever add a full prototype into your case study or just a few screen images along with maybe a user flow? So as you're doing the write-up, it's as you're doing the write-up, you want to include imagery just to sort of move the message along, but you can definitely include links to a prototype. I was just looking at a prototype or a case study today where they had links to an active prototype or a final project. So definitely you can link to those things, but I wouldn't necessarily try to get it in line with everything. So just have a link to final project type of link. All right, hopefully that answers that question. Let me know if it didn't. And then what are we working on this sprint build week? Very confused. Ooh, that looks like that came before I just answered it. So if that's still confusing, let me know. And I'm happy to answer more questions about that.
We're not going to be working with developers in the build week, right? We're just doing our own thing.
No, yeah, you are on your own for this build week.
Okay.
You won't work with developers again until labs.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. That is all I have for today. So my usual practice, if you are ready to get rolling, go ahead and leave the channel, but I'm happy to stay on and continue to answer questions. So thanks everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Ooh, that was fast.